Can you see my face? Okay, it's clear. So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning. My name is Lina Uya, and here I will explain to you about language maintenance and shift. And our submaterial today are the first is language shift, second is language shift in different community, third is language maintenance, and next is language death and language loss. And next is factor contributing to language shift. And finally is reviving language. Okay, let's move to our first explanation. This is about language shift. So, language shift occurs when a community of users replace one language by another or shift to that other language. And this is the process whereby a speech community shift to a different language, usually over an extended period of time. Often, languages are perceived to be high status stabilis or spread at the expense of other languages that are perceived by their own speaker to be lower status. Language shift can be understood best as a social strategy through which individual and group compete for position or prestige, power, and domestic security. What is important then is not just domains but for vertical social mobility and a linkage between language and access to position of prestige and power. A relatively small immigrant elite population can encourage this language shift, and numerical domain indicates in a non-state or pre-state context if the elite employ a specific combination of encouragement and punishment. Anthony's historical case demonstrate that small elite groups have successfully imposed their language in non-state situations. And then, for example, of language shift, and here I chose Israel or Palestine country as example. So an example is the shift from Hebrew to Aramaic in and around Jerusalem during the time of classical antiquity. Another example is during the Middle Ages when shifting from Aramaic to Arabic took the advent of Islam. And so we can look that the first day language is Hebrew, and then because during the time of classical antiquity they moved the language to Aramaic, and then when Arabic took the advent of Islam, then they moved the language from Aramaic to Arabic, and then a third shift took place in modern times is under the influence of Jainism from Jewish language. And I think that's all explanation about language shift. Next, we move to SCON explanation. SCON explanation. It is about language shift in different community. So this divide into several things. Namely, the first is immigrant minority. And people usually switch rapidly from press to press for instance. Reaction to code switching style are negative in many communities, despite the fact that proficiency in interstitial code switching requires good control of both code. And this might reflect the attitude of the majority the monolingual group in past, like in North America and Britain. And in places such as New Guinea and East Africa, where multilingualism is the norm, attitude to province code switching are much more positive. And the order of domains in which language shift occurs might differ for different individual and different group, but gradually over time the language of the wider society displaces the minority language mother tongue. This might take their 4 generations, but some language speech can be complete in just 2 generations. Typically, migrants are virtually monolingual in their mother tongue. Their children are bilingual, and their grandchildren are often monolingual in the language of the host country. And the next is non-migrant community. So language shift is not always one result of migration. And for this community or for non-migrant community, the home is the one most under any family control. Language might be maintained in more domain than just the home. And next, third is migrant majority. So when language shift occur, it is always shift toward the language of the domain powerful group. A domain group has no interactive to adopt the language of minority. The domain language is associated with status, prestige, and social success. And when a language dies gradually, as opposite to all its speaker being wiped out by a massacre or epidemic, and the function of the language are taken over in one domain after another by another. And the fourth is attitude and value. So positive attitude support effort to use the minority language in a variety of domains, and this help people resist the pressure from the majority group to switch their language. There are certain social factors which seem to relate to retard result language shift for a minority language group, at least for a time. And first, where language is considered an important symbol of a minority group identity, and second, if formerly a minority group live near each other frequently. Another factor which may contribute to language maintenance for those who immigrate is the degree and frequency of contact with the homeland. And factors contributing to language shift, these are economic, social, and political factors. And the most obvious factor is that the community sees an important reason for learning the scan language, and the second important factor is their ethnic language. And next is demographic, where factors also relevant in accounting for the spread of language shift. Resistance to language shift tends to last longer in rural than in urban area. Shifted to occur faster in some group than in other, and the size of the group is sometimes a critical factor. Although the pressure to shift are strong, member of a minority. Next, we move to third explanation. This is about language maintenance. So, language maintenance is a situation when a speech community can maintain or continue using their language from generation to generation, although there are conditions that could affect them to shift to another language. And in a maintaining language, a speech community refuses to use another language, and often termed as language loyalty, while the situation is known as language maintenance. Language maintenance refers to the situation where the speech community continues to use its traditional language in the face of host of conditions that might foster a shift to another language. And language maintenance denotes the continuing use of a language in the face of competition from a regionally and social more robust language. And the child's first language is critical to his or her identity, and maintaining his language can help the child value his or her culture and heritage, and which contribute to a positive self-concept. So, next explanation is about language death and language loss. About language death. Language death is rarely a sudden event, but a slow process of each generation learning less and less of the language until its use is relegated to the domain traditional use, such as in poetry and song. And one example language that feel that language is Roman. So, in Indonesian, I say that bahasa Roman itu adalah bahasa yang sudah punah, yang mana mereka digunakan di Dalmatia, wilayah Kroasia saat ini, dan sejauh selatan kota di Montenegro. Jadi bahasa Roman ini adalah bahasa yang dulunya digunakan di Dalmatia, di mana Dalmatia ini sekarang disebut dengan Kroasia. Juga bahasa Romania ini dulunya digunakan di Montenegro, tapi sekarang karena tidak ada lagi penutur bahasanya dan sedikitnya literasi tentang bahasa itu, makanya bahasa Romania sekarang jadi kayak mati gitu, dead language. And Akira Yamamoto, anthropologist, she has identified 9 factors that he believes that will help prevent language death. And the first is there must be a domain culture that for linguistic diversity. And second is the immigrant community must possess an ethnic identity that is strong enough to encourage language preservation. And then the next is the creation and promotion of program that educate students on the endangered language and culture. Jadi in Indonesian I can say that kita dapat melakukan yang namanya promosi dan melakukan kreasi-kreasi yang berhubungan dengan bahasa kita sehingga bahasa itu tidak punah gitu. And then next is the creation of school program that are both bilingual and bicultural. So in Indonesian I can say that kan biasanya di sekolah itu kayak terkesan kaku gitu ya. Jadi dia berpendapat bahwasanya dengan adanya program yang berkreasi lah seperti itu, di mana mengkreasikan antara bilingual dan bicultural itu dapat membantu yang namanya mengurangi kematian bahasa, karena kan memang di sekolah itu kebanyakan mereka belajar tentang bahasa, jadi mereka mengingat tentang bahasa itu kayak gitu. And then next, for native speaker to revise teacher training. So I can say that in Indonesian dia itu maksudnya kayak ada kayak native speakernya itu kayak mengajarkan kayak menjalani program teacher training supaya native speakernya itu bisa mengajarkan bahasa itu kepada yang lain, jadi bahasanya tidak mati begitu. And then English speech community must be completely involved. And next is there must be language material created that are easy to use. And next is the language must have written material that encompass and traditional content. Next is the language must be used in no environment and the area the language is used, or both old and new, and must be strengthened. And also that is all about tadi. And next, according to Campbell and Montes in 1989, he distinguished 4 types of language death. The first is gradual death. It is involved the gradual replacement of one language by another. An example is the replacement of Gaelic by English in part of Scotland. And second is sudden death is rapid extinction of a language without an intervening period of bilingualism. And the last speaker then is monolingual in the dying language as with Tasmanian. And third is radical death, where is when a community stop speaking their language out of self-deserve. For example, after the massacre of thousands of Indians in El Salvador in 1932, the speaker of Cacaopera and Lancia stopped speaking their language as not to be identified as Indian. And fourth is bottom top, and so bottom to top death is when language ceases to be used as a medium of conversation but may survive in special use like region or folk song. And for example, the example is Chazal in Mexico has only a few older speakers in in scattered village but survive in the register of prior. The next is language loss. Language loss usually happen in second generation because the speaker more often use the second language than mother tongue. And language loss is a process in which an individual either choose learning and using inherited language, is forced to stop using a particular language, or in the case of young children, no longer receive input in the heritage language, with the result being loss of ability to use the first language in a meaningful way. And Indonesian, we can say that language loss ini adalah segala gejala suatu bahasa yang mana bahasa itu hampir punah. Adapun penyebabnya itu yang pertama ada school education atau pendidikan di sekolah. Dimana kan di sekolah itu jarang banget yang namanya, karena sekolah itu basisnya nasional, jadi kebanyakan ketika berinteraksi dengan teman sebaya atau dengan guru, kita tentunya menggunakan bahasa formal yaitu bahasa nasional, menyebabkan bahasa ibu atau like non-standard language itu punah gitu. Jadi kayak lost language gitu loh, hampir punah. And second is lacking interest atau kurang daya tarik, dimana masyarakat itu cenderung kurang meminati yang namanya bahasa daerah atau bahasa dialek, sehingga bahasa itu menjadi terancam punah. And next is assimilation, and fourth is acculturation, and 5 is linguistic policy of the government, and 6 is gradual loss of culture, and 7 is speaker socio-economic status and attitude, 8 is literature and script, and 9 is social distance. Move to the next topic. Next topic is factor contributing to language shift. So, language shift is a relatively common occurrence. Language shift can occur as a gradual process, or it can be planned explicitly. And when language deserves itself as a problem, language shift policies are the goal for language acquisition planning, both explicit and implicit. And factor causing language shift are economic, social, and political factor, demographic factor, and also attitude and value. The first is economic factor. So, getting a job is the most obvious economic reason to learn another language. And in English-dominated country, for example, people learn English to get a job. And this results in bilingualism, and the high demand from the industry for employees who are fluent in English has success in encouraging job seekers to equip themselves with English. And in fact, being competent in English leads to well-paid work. And second is social factor. So, language shift occurs when people see no reason to take active steps to develop their ethnic language, and when a community of speakers move to an area or country whose language is different from theirs, so there is a tendency to switch to a new language. And every time an immigrant learns the native language of the new country and pass it on to his children in exchange for the language of the old country. And third is political factor. A rapid shift occurs when people are desperate to success in a society where knowledge of a second language is a prerequisite for success. And fourth is demographic factor. And resistance to language shift tends to last longer in rural area than in urban area, because rural groups tend to be isolated longer from center of political power. rural community can meet most of their social needs in ethnic or minority language. For example, in Ukraine in Canada, who live outside city on farms have retained their ethnic language better than people in city because of their relative social isolation. And five is attitude and value. So language shift tends to be slower among community where minority language are highly valued. When minority groups support the use of minority language in various domains, it is better for them to resist pressure from the majority group to switch to the language of the majority group. Move to the final explanation. And the final explanation is about maintaining or reviving language. So, language revitalization, also referred to as language revival or reversing a language shift, is an attempt to halve or reserve the baseline of a language or to revive an existing one. Thus, can include parties such as linguistic, cultural or community group, or government. And language revitalization, also referred to as language revival or reversing language shift, is an attempt to halve or reserve the baseline of a language or to revive an existing one. And thus involved can include parties such as linguistic, cultural, community group, and or government, and some requests for a distinction between language revival or the resurrection of an existing language with no exciting native speaker, and language revitalization or the rescue of a dying language. And it has been pointed out that there has only been one successful instance of a complete language revival, that of the Herbal language, creating a new generation of native speaker without any pre-existing native speaker as model. Language revitalization is also closely tied to the linguistic field of language documentation, and in this field, linguistic attempt to create full record of a language, grammar, vocabulary, and linguistic feature. And this practice can overlead to more concern for the revitalization of a specific language on study. And furthermore, the task of documentation is often taken on with the goal of revitalization in mind. I think that's all my explanation. Thank you for watching and hearing about my explanation, also listening my explanation. Thank you so much. See you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.